Hello and welcome to the Intuitive Heart Healing Podcast. My name is Valeri McLaughlin and I am your host for today's podcast. I created this podcast to share experience, tools, wisdom, teachings with all of you to help you along with your healing journey. And today I have a very special guest coming back, Ursula Duffy, astrologer and aromatherapist, to talk to you about how to navigate the energies of the universe, especially with some of the energies that are coming through now with the eclipse season, which we are partly through, and Mars, who has entered retrograde on Sunday, October 30th, 2022, and what you can expect. And we each share our experiences of navigating through the eclipse because not every person is the same. It depends a lot on your natal chart and where things are lined up. So we share our experiences about what we're going through to help give you an idea. Remember, all these tools, wisdom and knowledge, and shared journeys are here to help empower you through your own healing journey. So sit back, relax, and welcome Ursula Duffy to the show. Hello, Ursula. How you doing today?
I am rolling with the punches, Val. How about you?
Oh, just letting whatever happens happen and then be with it. It's been it's been an interesting few months, but this last few weeks have been really interesting.
Same here.
Yeah, last week's eclipse really didn't take me by surprise. That's not the word, but um, I was just very happy that I had time to be with myself.
Yeah. Yeah. Everything that's been going on, which I know we'll get into and talk about, isn't surprising to me either, but sometimes when it's just like extra with eclipse seasons and the chaos that comes along with them, just kind of taking a step back and, like you said, being with yourself is really helpful. I have been in defense and reactive mode with everything that's been happening with me, so I haven't really had a chance to just sit and be with myself. So I'm looking forward to hopefully doing that maybe one day this week.
Yeah. You know how things just kind of happen and are aligned, and sometimes you don't think about it. And that was like what happened with me when I ended my employment with my current job that I just had. It ended on Friday before the eclipse. And I didn't even think about it. It wasn't like a thought in my mind. I was just like, okay, this date works good. And then when it all came, I was like, oh my God, thank God.
Yeah, that was a big culmination for you.
Yeah, it's a big closing out.
Mm-hmm.
Really big closing out, not just of this time, but my time with them before. So
Mm-hmm.
a lot of that is, yeah, all coming together.
Yeah. Yeah. So you want to just give everyone some dates and information to start, and then we can kind of talk about what we're experiencing.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah. So we are right smack in the middle of this eclipse season. We are right smack in the middle of actually the kind of portal between eclipses. Our first one was last week on Tuesday, and that was a partial solar in Scorpio. So just for our own charts, first house for you, seventh house for me, since
Mm-hmm.
our charts are like mirrors. I'm a Taurus rising, you're a Scorpio rising. And then next Tuesday is a total lunar in Taurus on Tuesday the 8th. So we are right dab smack in the middle. But the seasons kind of start a little bit before on either side of the two actual eclipses, with the lunation that comes first. So with the Aries full moon on October 8th, I think it was, is when the season kind of started. And like all of October has just been complete chaos for me in my life. It's been wild. So what you said about the job makes sense, because that kind of brings in, when we're talking about the eclipses, we kind of look at what we have in our own charts. And for both of us, it's our first house, seventh house, and then squaring our 10th house and our fourth house. So that brings in home and work as well. So I'm seeing that on my side as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and my home is kind of up in the air right now, so.
Yeah. And what we experienced on I probably October 1st through the 5th was the remnants of Hurricane Ian came through South Jersey. And we had like leaks upon leaks, indoor rain, just like total chaos at home. So interesting that kind of aligned with the timing just before that full moon, and leading into eclipse season actually kind of started a little bit sooner on my end with all of that. Yeah.
Yeah, that was, I guess, right before then. I was kind of like in the halfway point of when I gave notice. And then on the full moon, I went out to San Diego, just trying to figure out, what I want to do when that job kind of is complete.
Mm-hmm.
I do know one thing. I'm not moving back to South Jersey.
I know. I'm very sad about that, but I understand.
And I am very happy and content to stay in Vegas as long as my journey keeps me here.
Yeah.
We'll see what happens.
We will certainly see what happens. So, I mean, this is how the energies work. The eclipses happen, and sometimes they bring, an influx of just chaotic change and just things that happen. And it's just like, whoa, what the hell is happening? But they like come in and kind of push us and guide us and like actually eclipse things out of our lives. So with you, it was your job that finally, so did that cycle for you with the place where you were working begin in the early 2000s by any chance?
Well, I started originally with the place the first time around in 2004, and I left there originally in 2017. Then I went back in April of 2021, and then I just completed the cycle in October 21st, 2022.
Wow. Yeah. So the reason I asked that is because when we have eclipses, they happen when the sun gets close to one of the nodes of the moon. And I think we've talked about the nodes of the moon before in previous episodes, but just to recap for everybody, they are invisible points in the sky. We can't see them. They're known as shadow planets, and they represent the intersection points of the orbits of the sun and the moon. So whenever the sun gets close to one of the nodes, the sun and the moon line up on the same like plane, which is why one eclipses the other. And that generally happens twice a year. The last time the nodes were in Taurus and Scorpio like they are now was roughly 18 years ago. So we see a lot of things repeating from the time of the things that we've experienced during the time 18 years ago, because the themes repeat. And that's how they work. They just bring some of the things can resurface.
If my math is right, that's 2004.
I believe so, yeah.
And I started that job in November 17th. So they approached me at the end of October.
So that's Scorpio season.
Yeah.
It's probably some kind of solar eclipse.
That's funny.
Yeah. Isn't it? It's interesting.
It is really funny.
Yeah. It's just like these cycles upon cycles upon cycles.
Yeah, so that makes so much sense. That I'm closing it out now too.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. And it's just like, especially right now with the way they're happening with other planets and things, it's bringing up a lot in our relationships. It's bringing up a lot in our mindset. It's bringing up a lot. So the one that happened last week was a South Node eclipse, and the South Node's like a release point. So it's like releasing outdated behavior patterns, releasing emotions. A lot of that comes along with Scorpio in general. It's just, the shadowy deep, what lies beneath the surface. So anything that's coming up and bubbling up, especially maybe even tied back to that time, it's, coming up for a reason.
I don't know if we have like enough time to talk about everything that I went through.
Well,
As
that
I
would be your
sit
first house, so it's all about you.
as I sit here and sip my Scorpio tea, I figured it was like perfect timing, but it was a big release um, in that aspect, and then a lot of things resurfaced for me to kind of go through, which we'll get into. We'll get through the dates part first.
Yeah, so that was the first one was October 25th. That was last Tuesday. And then, like I said, the next one is next Tuesday on November 8th. And that'll be a total lunar eclipse in Taurus. And that's a North Node eclipse. So that's the energy that's pulling us forward into something new. Kind of our path forward in life, fielding new territory, getting out of our comfort zone. This one is extremely intense energetically we have the planet Uranus involved, which brings chaos and change. Like Uranus is present throughout this whole cycle anyway. And it's really close to the North Node right now. So we'll have the Moon, Uranus, North Node all together for this eclipse. And it's activating these other squares that we've kind of been through, like underlying themes. Kind of like all last year. This only happens every, so many decades. Saturn square Uranus, which is outdated behavior patterns and comfort zone versus moving forward, Saturn versus Uranus. And then the other thing that we have going on concurrently this time around, which started on Sunday, is the Mars retrograde. So we have Mars retrograde and eclipse season concurrent, which is adding to the extra.
We love to talk about the Mars retrograde. I went back to my old episodes because I was looking for something and I was like, oh, we've already talked about it, but it's like it always seems that it comes up in an important time and really is impactful. And I don't know, people talk about other retrogrades a little bit more and you don't necessarily hear about Mars. And it is very influential in your life.
It is. It is. It's just interesting too, just like the synchronicities and things that happen because it's retrograde in the sign of Gemini, which relates to new ideas and communication to a great extent. And then it went retrograde on Sunday, and then just yesterday, AT&T and T-Mobile have these huge cell service outages. It's just like uncanny how the timing of it works.
And I got a funny story to talk about Sunday as well. Because it's highlighting my Gemini, which is where my sun is. Yeah. And my Mercury's in Gemini. Wait, what else is in
and your South Node, I believe. Yep. So it's very intimate how these things influence our own charts personally, like all aside from the collective experience of everything too.
Which I guess we could talk about a little bit as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Because we have like a mirror effect happening too. Like these are happening in the same houses of our charts, but in opposite directions, kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's funny because when we were talking, when we first got together, we did my chart. I didn't know a lot about Scorpio. There's only like we're always influenced by the people that are around us and the people around us that have these signs. And there was really no Scorpios that I know of in my life that I was like really aware of at the time, except for when I came across my friend Todd, and his parents were both Scorpios, and it was like very like intense and like back and forth, like they take a jab at and so I always had this like opinion of my view of what Scorpio is. And I'm like, oh, Scorpio is my first house. Like it was like, but, and then it's also one of those signs, just kind of like Gemini, where people are like, oh, you're a Gemini. And it happened to me recently. Somebody said to somebody else who was a Gemini, is like, oh, you're two-faced. And I was like,
stereotypes.
And then I came across somebody else who I've been talking to, and she's like, are you a real Gemini or a fake Gemini?
The hell does that mean?
I love that face. So
she's come across like 3 Geminis in her, well, more than that, but like 3 important Geminis in her life. And 2 of them are very back and forth, like, and they're very like, I want to, like, it's got to be their way. And, one minute they could be all nice and the next minute they're like lashing out.
Mm-hmm.
And they're both kind of like this. And then she has this other person that's a Gemini that is like totally opposite and very like want to talk things through and kind of like level headed and sweet and things like that. And so that's why she was like, well, which Gemini are you? And I said, well, first of all, there's more that goes into it than just that. And I said, just off the bat, like there's a lot more that goes with that. I said, but Geminis really get a bad rap. And I feel like Scorpios kind of get bad rap. And I want to say like Sagittarius sometimes get a bad rap too. But I always explain like every sign has different parts of it. Like there's duality in the signs.
Absolutely.
And so like, for most Geminis, depending on what else we don't like to do our emotions, like our emotions come up for us. And sometimes it's attack and sometimes it's like turn away. So it like depends. And so it was really interesting. So I'd like to like hear a little bit of your intake on that.
Yeah, well, Gemini does represent duality in its core, in the energy of the sign, because it's the twins. But then the other thing too, to speak to the stereotypes, is we're just talking about someone's sun sign. You're not looking at the whole picture.
Yeah.
So you could have a Gemini that's like the first example that you gave, and that could be like maybe their sun's in their first house, and that's just how they show up in the world in general. It's just like super Gemini energy. And then the other one, the sun could be somewhere in a more hidden part of the chart. So what they're showing is their rising sign, which could be something more like a Libra that's, a little bit more calm and diplomatic and that kind of thing. So it all depends. It all depends on what planet's where, what house it's in, what sign, how much energy you have in one specific sign. And I do like, because of this pop astrology with sun signs, it does always just get correlated to just that. But there's just so much more. So that's like, I always want to try and expand people's view. Is it's not just the sun, you're your whole chart, and it all works together. And how you show up is really related very much to your first house and your rising sign.
So I pulled up her friend's chart, like you showed me how to do, and with the whole signs. She's got 4 planets in Gemini in house number 7. That's the one she calls the fake Gemini.
Well, that's where we project from too.
Yeah.
So a lot of that, like, especially like you said, like it's an air sign, so it's a more mental sign, not necessarily getting into the emotional part of things first, and more, communicative and reactive. But if you have something there that's like Mars per se,
yeah,
then you can throw that energy out at people. Like we're talking about now with the retrograde, it's in Gemini. Yeah. So you have to be kind of careful with our communication and expression, because Mars is the planet that can relate to our drive and our will, our sense of courage, and like our soul, all of the stuff that relates kind of to your solar plexus, but also projection for sure, anger, aggression. So when the planet gets really close, we have to be really careful and kind of like pausing for a moment before we react, making sure that we're responding, like you said, taking some time to just process things, because it's at a standstill now. So we're not moving forward as far as our Mars energy goes. We're just kind of sitting in it, and it's asking us to sit in it for a reason.
Yeah.
And the Mars retrograde, like you said, it's not as common. It only happens every couple of years, and it's for 2 months. So we've got 2 months of this starting Sunday into the middle of January. So it's going to be very interesting. Just think like it relates to communication and information. So I'm very curious, especially with this eclipse coming up next week, to kind of see how it's all going to play out collectively. Very interesting times.
So any other important dates we got going on?
I could say pretty much just like the peak of the retrograde will be in early December with the full moon in Gemini. That's kind of like the midpoint but it's that full moon's going to add a lot of intensity to it. So we have the, concurrent right now. Eclipse season will be over with, I think, that full moon, or no, the new moon in Sagittarius 2 weeks after next week's eclipse. So we'll kind of be out of eclipse season at that point, but we'll still have the Mars retrograde going on. So everything we just said kind of continues. And then just like processing everything that's been happening during eclipse season. Because a lot of times things just happen and you're like for me, I haven't really had a time to sit with it because I'm just like, there's constant, like there's one thing after another that just keeps happening. So on the other side of that will probably be a good time to just sort of do some maybe journaling or however you process things. Anything related to Gemini energy, talking it out, writing it down, that kind of thing. But as far as dates go, what we're in right now, I pretty much covered them.
Yeah. Journaling has been huge for me. I've never been a huge journal, like I would do it here and there, but I've been committed like every day to journaling. I actually created my own.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. So I was like, oh, I really like this. So I was like, okay, I'd rather be in that energy. So this one is all about love because it's
beautiful.
Got that, which is what's been a lot showing up lately. Constant. That's my constant message, and what put that out there. That my Leo energy there, huh?
I love it.
So yeah, but journaling has been helping me quite a lot.
Yeah, it's a really helpful way to process things.
And sometimes I sit down and I don't even know what I'm going to journal about, but I'm like, I'm committed. Every day I'm going to do this. And I sit down and then I'm like, okay. And then a question pops up and then it just like starts going or whatever it turns in. And that's like, it's a big thing. Like whatever it turns into, you just allow it to happen.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, and if you're not like the writing type, you could always just talk into your voice recorder on your phone, or there's other ways to journal than writing things down. Just for anybody listening that could use another tool.
Yeah, sometimes I do talk it out. Sometimes it's out of my head, but yeah, I mean, my podcast helps me get out of it too.
Yeah, me too.
Let's get it out.
Too. Yep. Get the energy moving. That's the most important thing, especially with Mars. Yeah. Get the emoting.
Yeah, it's so last week when the beginning of the week when the eclipse was happening, my body felt like super heavy. Like I was walking around with weights on me.
Yeah.
And not sleeping a lot, like getting up like super early, like I'm not an early person. I've been getting up like super early, like 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning early. And then I had 2 people mention to me about going to the gym. So I was like, you know what, that's a good idea. So I had all this energy and like was helping. Until like my back went out yesterday. So I was like, my whole plan was like to go to gym and it's like, nope. You sit here and be in it.
Pain.
Oh, you warned me about this year.
Yeah.
But it's been, to me, I always look at these as opportunities to learn more about self. Learn more about you. And one of the things that I recently talked about in my podcast is that like the journey is all about you, and it's your journey in life. Your purpose in life is to understand you.
Yeah.
And in understanding you, that's where you can impact the universe the most. And with it being the eclipse season and Mars and retrograde and everything, it's really made me like really learn. And not only that, is you talk about cycles and how we move in cycles, and how so each point is an opportunity to learn about yourself.
Yeah.
So where I am in this journey with the eclipses is not going to be the same as where you are.
Correct.
Or where somebody else is.
Correct.
even somebody that may be like the same age around the same time, because it all depends on what we've done with ourselves and what we've learned and what we've like used to move forward.
Mm-hmm.
And everything for me, like everything I've learned along the way, all the tools that I've gathered and all like the healing I've done really has helped me go through a few things that have happened this week a lot more easily, and then also be able to understand things a lot more. Like when my back goes out and just be like, you know what, I surrender.
Yeah. That surrender piece is a big part of it, especially right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and this is what we call the work, right? This is what the work of our lives is to, become more self-aware and heal in particular with especially where you're at with your own healing journey and your, Chiron cycle and all that. So it's really important. And then you do the things and incorporate the tools and the processes, and then you can impart that knowledge onto other people, which is a big part of your purpose, I think.
Oh,
and
yeah.
kind of the power in being able to share and, having the courage to even share what you've been doing and all these experiences. It's important. And with eclipses in your first house, like for you, the one on Tuesday was in your first. It's how you're showing up in the world and releasing more things that are blocking you or preventing you from showing up as your true self.
So it's funny you said it, because like one of the things that came up for me like Monday into Tuesday is about hiding.
The hiding again, huh?
Hiding again. But because I've dealt with it before, I was able to kind of look at it differently.
Mm-hmm.
But somebody that I started talking to asked me about seeing my podcast, listening to the podcast. And I was like, huh. Because I'm very vulnerable on my podcast.
You are.
And I was talking to another friend of mine. I was telling them, like, well, don't you think people listen? I'm like, yeah, but I never think that like necessarily people that know me listen. And it's like, it's funny because I could be so open and vulnerable to like an audience, but like not necessarily like people that know me. And she's like, you don't think your parents listen? I'm like, oh, they read everything I post, and they watch anything that's on like Facebook. But to go to a podcast and listen to it, I don't know if my mom knows how to go to a podcast to listen to it. And it's not that I would hide it from them at all, but it was just like, when somebody that you just start talking to, that you're just starting to know, asked you, and your whole life is out there for them to see, it's like, huh.
Mm-hmm.
And it brought up, and then the whole thing where, especially I had just done the recent one with light language, which now
I love that one.
They told me to call it just love language. And
okay.
Ooh, I like that. I was like, I haven't told this person like I channel this stuff. So it was very interesting, and I just kind of had to work through it. And then I was open and honest about like what my hesitation was to the person as well, which is another huge step in all the work and healing that I've done.
Yeah. And to go back to the comments about Scorpio, since that's your rising sign in your first house, a really high expression and in positive light, Scorpio energy is transformation and transmutation and that personal alchemy. So that was all part of that process. So your responsibility with your chart in having a Scorpio rising is to embody that Scorpio energy, and look what happened. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then really like feel those emotions too. Like a lot of the bad rap that Scorpio gets is a lot of times people don't really feel those deep, deep, deep emotions. And that just gets like stuck. And then that's where the intensity is, because they're not emoting.
Yeah. And so not only that, but like the Gemini aspect of the chart too, because Gemini also like people think they're superficial, but Geminis actually go into the darkness a lot. Sometimes they don't understand it at their own darkness, and they see it as others, or they see it with others and it's with them. But I've always been somebody that's kind of not shied away for it. Didn't always understand it. We've talked about it before because also it sits in my 8th house.
Right, exactly.
But like one of the things people tell me all the time, like, well, you love to go in the darkness. And I am like, yeah, because that's where I'm going to see the most light. And so that has helped me a lot. And so then when the eclipse hit on Tuesday, I was in bed most of the day, bawling my freaking eyes out.
Mm.
And it was a lot of like grief that I was just releasing.
Mm-hmm.
And I can allow myself to do that.
Yeah, that's important.
And not like beat yourself up about it. Like, oh my God, it makes a big, big difference.
Yeah, I agree with you. Totally agree with you.
So have you been surrendering to the chaos?
I've been doing my best. Doing my best. So for me, the one on Tuesday was in my 7th house, which is close friends, intimate partnerships, relationships, kind of like where we draw people in as well. So yeah, right prior to the one on Tuesday, like I said, this has all kind of started well before the actual eclipses started happening. One of our team members that was with us since the beginning of Sea Goddess decided to leave. So that was really bittersweet and sad, but totally understandable because she had actually moved in the fall of last year. So just like something getting eclipsed out and ending in that space, which is hard when you have like, somebody you're friends with, but also partners with on the team. I'm still just like processing that. And then we've been having some typical Mercury retrograde fashion car trouble that's resurfacing from some work we had done during the last retrograde in September, pretty much like all of September. So that's been really frustrating because now we're kind of like under a deadline because we have to pass inspection. So that's just back and forth, trying to like balance out, how much is too much to spend in an older car. It's just like my finances are tied in now because the Mars retrograde is happening in my 2nd house, and that's personal resources and including money. And then even before, so after that happened, the news that we got from the team member, we woke up Monday morning to the rear windshield of our car being bashed in. It was just parked on the street, and we went out in the morning. Matt went to go to work, and the windshield was bashed in. So it's like destruction to personal property, Mars retrograde in the 2nd house. Like, it doesn't get more literal than that. So when we had a flat tire the Friday before that. So it's just like all this stuff is happening. It's just like, okay, well, we got to get it fixed because we've got one car. And it's just, it's a lot after everything that happened with the leaks in the house and then coming into more personal property things happening. I mean, Mars went into Gemini in August, so it's been there for a while already. And then just some other things, like the one coming up next week will be in my 1st. So it'll be in your 7th. So that'll be flipped. And I've had just like some interruptions in my personal cycles, and it's just total chaos. It's total chaos. And like, I'm displaced right now. I'm recording this with you at my parents' house because the car's in the shop across the street. So it's just like rolling with the punches and just, okay, what's next? Surrender, deal with it. hope for some peace on the other side. That's kind of where I'm at with a lot of things right now.
Yeah. And it's funny because like coming up for me, I had a date scheduled on the first eclipse that had to be canceled and rescheduled. Then we had this originally set up on Friday.
Yep.
It had to be canceled and rescheduled. And then Saturday morning, I was supposed to meet up with somebody, and they canceled, and we had to reschedule. So Saturdays got rescheduled to Sunday. You got rescheduled to today, Monday, or Tuesday. What day is it? Tuesday.
Tuesday.
And the original date I had on the first eclipse, and I didn't realize this, but we rescheduled it for next eclipse.
Really? So next Tuesday.
Next Tuesday.
And a lot of what's happening has like echoes of Mercury retrogrades because it's happening in a Mercury ruled sign. So right now, Mars and Mercury are actually what's called a mutual reception. They're in each other's signs. So we've got Mars in Gemini, which is ruled by Mercury, and we have Mercury in Scorpio, which is ruled by Mars. So there's like an interesting communication influence of the planets energetically that's happening with the way that this is all starting and playing out with like I said, the cell interruption, rescheduling. That's like total Mercury retrograde kind of stuff. Car problems, like it's typical.
Yeah. And then when Mars went into retrograde on Sunday, so I went out to lunch, and then like I had something happened Saturday night, and I was like, stuff kind of resurfaced that kind of also like triggered something from like within me from the past, and so in case people forget about where I came from and when I started talking about this, I was a pretty closed off person. You know, I would take my emotions with me, pack them inside, and go hide. I mean, that is pretty much my MO with it. Like even when I was a kid, you know, something happened. I didn't open up to anybody. I just kind of took them, packed them in there. I would sit with them, but I would never let them go. But at the same time, it wasn't like I brought it in where, you know, it was like, oh, this is this. It was just shoved in a compartment in me, and that was it. So over the last year, it's been unpacking this and letting this out and seeing how so on Sunday, I was like, okay. After I got back home, I was like, I just need to be with me. That's it. No TV, no music, no nothing. I just need like silence. And I just was like, I'm turning off my phone. If anybody's looking for me, like my phone is off, silent, like not even, and just went in myself and like went through and allow all these different emotions to come up. And it was like this roller coaster ride, right? So you're 1 minute, it's like, this is what I'm going to do. And then it's like, no, this is what I'm going to do. And this is what I'm going to, and it's just like, boo, boo, boo. And then come out of this on this whole other side yesterday, after I went through this, I sat down and I talked about it, and I talked about everything. And I was like, oh my God, that feels so much better.
Yeah.
But
That's that release.
Like that time by myself to like process it and allow it to come up, instead of to sit there and have a conversation, because I also needed to figure out like where I am before I could say where I want to be, because I didn't really know.
Yeah. And would you say that that's shadow work? Would you call that shadow work?
I don't know if I would actually I mean, some people would call it shadow work. To me, it's more of like it was more of inner work. Like, if it was shadow work for me, like when this happened before, when I've dealt with this before, and I didn't really fully do what I did, and I kind of still let parts of me that weren't healed come into play, and my ego come into play. To me, that's more still doing with the shadow work, because there's still that underlining negativity or old patterns that are still kind of holding you back.
Yeah.
And so to me, like, more of what I did was more of inner work, where it was more imbalanced, more like a unity and oneness. Like, so you can kind of go into the shadows and then go back into the light, and just kind of, it was more of an ebb and flow than that. And so I wouldn't call, me personally, I wouldn't call it shadow work.
I see what you're saying.
Personal.
There's a distinction. That's more like, it feels like soul searching to an extent, or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this is a very beautiful example, Val, of South Node going through your first house and eclipses in your first house, because the first set eclipses in the spring were also in your first and seventh. So this whole year we've had full on Taurus and Scorpio. Like, it hasn't drifted yet. Sometimes they drift. So April 30th, May 15th, or May 16th, we had solar in Taurus and lunar in Scorpio. And then this time it's solar in Scorpio and lunar in Taurus. So the feel of them is different, but having that release of all that emotion, and because the sun's going through your first house now because it's Scorpio season.
Yeah.
So just having that kind of bring you back to center, and like you said, that ebb and flow. Scorpio is a water sign. So, it's just a really interesting and beautiful example of working with this energy.
Yeah.
And everything that came up.
Yeah. And, understanding it, which you have helped me so much in understanding not only my chart, but like astrology in general, and getting more involved. Like, it is a huge tool in your life.
Mm-hmm.
It really has. And like understanding those parts of you. I was telling somebody about the first time, I actually been talking about it a lot. The first time you ever like read my chart and things that you said, and I'm like, oh my God, that makes so much sense. And I'm like, okay, so now let me understand this a little bit more. But some people don't find astrology very easy to understand.
Well, you did a deep dive and you did really well with it on your own. But yeah, I mean, that's why I feel like talking about things that are happening and correlating it to the eclipses and the Mars retrograde and all that, just like, and what I do on my own podcast is just like explaining the lived experience and how these things can happen and occur, and what they show us, and the lessons and the planetary placements and everything that you have kind of just like set up natally. It's fascinating to me.
It really is.
Yeah.
And it, helps me to understand other people of my life too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. We sat there, talked about, with my sister, we had done like one of my nephew's charts. And I was like, oh my God, this makes so much sense. And my sister was like, I don't understand this at all.
Yeah, I remember.
She still says this to me. She goes, you talk about it all the time and I still don't understand. And I'm like, yeah, but just like looking at like all the personalities in there, and how it relates to people in their actual chart, and you can go so deep, because we only touched about our sun and rising signs a lot today.
Yeah.
And our Mars placement a little bit. We didn't even touch on the moon.
No, we did not.
Mm-mm.
This one isn't really hitting. Well, the eclipses aren't hitting my moon, but the Mars retrograde is squaring my moon.
And your moon is
it's 20 degrees of Virgo.
So
Mars stationed at like 25 degrees of Gemini. And I have my moon and Jupiter together. So moon's at 20 and Jupiter's at like 25. So this Mars has just been pulsing at 25 degrees of Gemini for a while now. And that's been a pretty intense square for me.
I'm intrigued by the Virgo moon.
Yeah, me too. So here's a good example. When I had my first reading, my first astrology reading, I was very much only aware of like sun sign astrology and that kind of thing. And it was like a 4-part session that I did. I did what was called an eclipse journey, because everything with astrology started coming in for me when the eclipses were happening in Aquarius and Leo in 2017. So I went back in time and looked at eclipses over the course of like the last 5 to 10 years in my life, and saw how, like, when they were happening on my natal planets and that kind of thing, all these different things started coming in and changing and getting me on, correct path in my own life, which is how they work as well. And I made this like table, with dates and timelines and stuff. And I sent it to the astrologer that did my reading, and he was like, how Virgo of you. And I'm like, but I'm a Libra. Like, I don't understand. So having a very subconscious need for order and organization is a big part of that. My moon placement. So imagine how I handle chaos, and how many tools I've had to employ in my own life in the last few years to learn how to surrender. Big work.
So you deal with your emotions in a very Virgo way?
I was very much like you.
Okay.
I just kept everything to myself. I was very private. I held things in because my descendant, like the seventh house, is also your descendant, kind of like where you come from into this lifetime is Scorpio. So I actually have a lot of planets. So I have three planets on my descent. So I have 4 placements in Scorpio. So I have a lot of Scorpio energy too. It's just not, sun or moon or anything like that. So I did the same thing. I just buried everything. So for me, so my moon's in an earth sign, emoting in a practical way, I guess, is the best way I can say that I do it. So I just unpack things. I ground a lot. That helps me express my emotions. And doing things like journaling and organizing them in a certain way, like there's an order to it. That's like important for me in the way that I express. Talking things out now is really helpful for me, like vocalizing it helps me get things out. And just making sure that I'm not holding things in like I used to is really important. Similar process to what you described.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. My moon is in Cancer, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. You don't have anything this eclipse season or with the Mars retrograde making anything hard aspects to it, but you've had your own eclipse season when they were like 2020 when they were in Cancer and Capricorn.
I'm good. Like, I don't need to be dealing with that right now.
Yeah, that would be extra on top of it.
Like, it's already kind of extra. I don't need any extra on that.
No.
Mm-mm.
So yeah, and just to go back to takeaways from what we've been talking about, it's just helpful to know where this is happening in your chart. It's helpful to know where what house, with the I taught you whole sign. Do you still use whole sign?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So with whole sign houses,
does not, like, my mind can't comprehend it.
Yeah.
Like, somebody pulled up their chart on what's that other one?
There's cafe astrology. There's
yes, that one.
Yeah.
And they had I'm like, no, I can't. We got to do it this way. And they're like, what? And like, there's many different ways, but my mind doesn't see it that way, and it doesn't make sense. But when I can look at it in whole signs, it makes sense. And I do it differently than you do it, and you kind of do it sort of like with your astrology knowledge and your intuitive knowledge. And to me, it's a little, because I don't have that whole astrology knowledge. I've gained some along the way, but it's very intuitively where I look, like I see it and I see things. It's kind of like reading cards with me.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I see the cards, and then like all the information comes to me. Yeah. That's how. So, but it can only happen in whole houses, because if I try to do it somewhere else,
the other house systems can be confusing. I find that as well. Yeah,
it like scrambles my brain.
Yeah. So in a whole sign perspective, this will only be happening in one house of your chart. The Mars retrograde, the eclipses. So it kind of narrows it down and makes it easier to work with. But for anybody listening, in order to make sense of what's happening, or work with it better, or just kind of like recognize where things are coming up and the themes, it's helpful to know what houses the eclipses are, and then the Mars retrograde as well.
Mm-hmm. And the other thing you've kind of taught me is kind of looking at the degrees.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't until like recently that they started to kind of like click. So I don't know what the different ones mean, but like when I look at it, I'm like, okay, so this is kind of here. So it's kind of, so it kind of like helps me to understand their energy a little bit more, because depending on where they are in your house also kind of have effect on it.
Absolutely.
And
there's many studies, books, many things about the degrees. Just there's a whole thing called the decans, which divides the houses up into, and the signs up into 3, and each one means a certain thing, and it's really in depth and interesting.
Yeah. And I highly recommend to anybody that is listening, if you have never had your natal chart read, to absolutely do it. And Ursula is an amazing person to work with. And if you have it read, and you haven't had it read in a while and it didn't really make sense, maybe it's a great time to start revisiting. And I like to do my solar return. I've done the last two with you. Last year was like, when we did last year's, it was like so on point on a lot of things. I think there was like kind of like something that was kind of still lingering over that didn't really come in. But so far this year, what you've told me, it's been pretty spot on about everything that's kind of been going on, and it helps me too. So when these things come up, like my back going out, because one of the things you talked about is how it was going to be on my physical body this year. It's not like, oh my God, this is happening again, or like I'm like, okay, there's a reason why this is happening. And so it helps me to even navigate through the year.
Yeah, I love working with solar returns. There's a lot, like, personally for every individual that shifts in that, personal year marker, which is really, really, really fun to work with.
Yeah,
I work with them myself. Ever since I've started, it's just been, okay, so this is the tone of my year. How do I ease into this, work with this? You can already kind of feel it starting right before your birthday. I can, at least. I don't really look at the chart until my birthday, but the energy shifts, you can feel it.
Oh yeah, definitely. You can
Yeah.
definitely feel it, and you can change. You feel the change. And it's like, to me, it's like, okay, what's my blueprint for this year?
Yeah.
How can I how can I show up and navigate through this blueprint when it happens, and it shows up for me, and it makes it a lot easier to get through, and a lot easier to know what you're working with, and like how you can help it. Like if you know that the Mars retrograde is happening in your certain house and everything, okay, and you know the different like, how can I better work with Mars to help me through this?
Yeah. And I did write, I'll send you the link for it if you want to include it in the show notes. I did write a good piece on it with the degrees as well. I wrote about the Pleiadian symbols and the Chandra symbols and all that for the Mars retrograde, which is a really cool insight into some of the energy we've already started seeing and how it's going to kind of carry forward for the next couple months.
Yeah, I'll definitely add that into the show notes, because that stuff, that is really important, along with any information for anybody to contact you to set up their reading, because that's really interesting to like get into and help out. And just like anything that you do and things that I do, it isn't to tell you how something is going to be. Like whether I'm doing a healing or whether I'm doing a tour of guidance or we go into your Akashic records, these are all parts of you, your natal chart, to learn about you and give you tools to help you navigate and understand yourself.
Yeah.
And how you're going to show up in this world.
Absolutely.
And it's really about empowering you.
Yeah. And that self-awareness. Yeah.
And, astrology has empowered you. It has now become what you do. And even with your aromatherapy, did I say that right?
You did. Yes.
Yeah. And how it's all connected, and how they, it's a big part of it.
It is.
And any other final words that we have to end on here?
I don't think so. Just stay grounded. That's been helping me tremendously. And just sink into, your intuition. It's a really great time. Scorpio season in particular, just like, what are you feeling? What's your gut telling you? I think it's really important during this time too.
I think people forget how intuitive Scorpios really are.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like we should pull a card, because we always pull cards at the end of any of our sessions.
Go for it. I don't have any of my decks with me, unfortunately.
Well, I understood that. I was just trying to figure out what I wanted to pull. I was like, oh, I can use like the gate light activation gateway, and then I'm like, oh, that's a Rebecca Campbell, and then the dragon deck is kind of like screaming at me. So I think we're gonna go with the dragons, because I've been seeing
Awesome.
I've been seeing a white dragon and a two-headed white dragon a lot around me lately.
Dragons relate very much to eclipses and eclipse season as well.
Yes.
So perfect pick and perfect time to see them.
And the white dragons, do you know what the white dragons mean?
No. Are you using Diana Cooper's deck?
Yeah. And I just got these back last time I went home because my sister has been holding on to my decks. She's got a couple more. So like every time I go back east, like what else can I put in my suitcase and carry back?
Mm-hmm. Nice. I'm going to be writing a piece about dragons too. That should be coming out this week.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah. Us and the team. It'll be our next blog post.
Oh, perfect. We got the water dragon.
Oh, nice.
Scorpio being the water sign that it is.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Helps you flow easily around obstacles.
Mm.
Crystal light and love are flowing. Develop your psychic abilities and go with the flow.
Perfect.
What did I just say? People don't
Period.
realize how intuitive the sign is.
Period. End of sentence.
Yeah, and that's really what we've been talking about. Like you surrendering to the chaos is going with the flow.
Mm-hmm.
And me surrendering to the stillness to allow me to go through that is also going with the flow.
Yeah, and the emotions.
Yeah, and going with the flow doesn't mean always constantly have to move. It's about whatever is given to you, just go with it.
Yep.
Whether it's stillness, whether it's movement, whether it's chaos, whether it's peace, going with it instead of trying to resist it. Because, you know, when you resist something, it persists. So
Yep.
Go with it.
I like that. Just go with it.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate your time and your wisdom and knowledge in this subject. It's always great to talk to you about astrology.
Thanks, Val.
You're welcome.